Jason seemed to have an understanding of suffering that was way beyond his years. Ever since he was a little boy, Jason had wanted to be a mailman. So every day, he would walk the route with whichever postal worker was assigned to his block, and he would become very good friends with all of them. But sadly, the day came and Jason died. But on the morning of his funeral, all of the postal workers from Elgin, all of the postal workers circled Jason's home. They lined the block. They stood at attention in the driveway. And as the family got into the car to go to church, the postal workers sang Jason's favorite song, "Climb Every Mountain." And despite their heartbreak, the family remembered that Jason had told them that he was not afraid to die. He was not afraid because for him, dying meant that he was going to get to heaven by special delivery. That little boy knew what Paul meant when he said, "Stand firm in the Lord." Now, we all know stories like this, don't we? Or we have stories of our own that remind us of the reality of suffering in our life. And in the face of them, we always have to ask the same tough questions. Does suffering hold all the power, or does God still hold the power? Tough questions, even tougher challenges. So, Father Jim, could you tell us, where do we get the strength to suffer faithfully?
I actually believe the church is giving us the answer by giving us this gospel reading every second Sunday of Lent, the Transfiguration of Jesus. We get the strength to endure the sufferings that we have to endure by remembering the glimpses of glory we have received from God. Today is the Feast of the Transfiguration. Today is the Gospel of the Transfiguration, where we see Jesus, who actually becomes changed before the very eyes of his disciples. And he's talking to Moses and Elijah. They're seeing all of this wonderful stuff. Changes are happening to Jesus, but the real change that's happening is the change that's happening in the disciples. The change that's happening in the ones who are getting to see this magnificent presence of God. They get to see Jesus change. They get to see Moses and Elijah. They see their whole history before their eyes. They experience this frightening cloud. They hear this big voice of God, and it's a magnificent experience. As a matter of fact, it's such a high mountaintop experience that Peter, who's gone crazy, says, "Oh my God, this is so wonderful, Lord. Let us build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And what he's saying is, I am so happy to be here. Let's never leave. Let's stay on the mountaintop. And as soon as he asks it, what happens? Poof! It's all gone. It's all gone. The cloud's gone, the voice is gone, Moses is gone, Elijah is gone. And what happens? They're stuck with reality. And they have to go back down. The mountain and face the reality of their lives with all of the challenges that are there, with all of the hardship, with all of the everyday nitty-gritty painful life that's before them. But what's the story? The story is, because they remembered what they experienced on the mountaintop, they were able to even endure everything that they had to face, right? It's because of the mountaintop memory that they were able to go back and go through Jesus' death and then even go through their own martyrdoms. It's because they remembered how they saw God in Jesus, because they remembered that they were able to hang on to that memory and that vision no matter what they had to endure, no matter what they had to suffer. And that's where we get the strength. That's where we find the courage to endure during our own suffering. That's what the gospel is saying. This isn't just about Peter and James and John and Jesus and Moses and Elijah. This is about you. This is about us. And you know what that's like. I'm like preaching to the choir here. You know what it's like to be able to survive through the tough times. If you didn't, you wouldn't even be here to pray with us. You already know it by heart, exactly what Peter, James, and John learned today on the mountaintop. You've had your own experiences. And that's what the second Sunday of Lent asks you to think about. What are your glimpses of God's glory in your life? When are the times that you practically have seen the face of God right before you? What are those moments in your life that have been so profound that you've been overcome with knowledge of the presence of God near you and with you and in you? Perhaps it happened when you were a little kid. Perhaps it happened at a moment as being a child you were just so happy to be in your home and a member of your family and with the love that you have from your mom and dad or grandparents. Perhaps it's the moment when you fell in love and you looked into his eyes and thought, this is like God on earth. Perhaps it's the day of your wedding when you never thought you'd be happier. Perhaps it's when you helped someone die and looked into their eyes and knew God was in those eyes. Perhaps it's when you felt the closeness of a friendship that so overwhelmed you by the friend's support that you just had a pain in your gut of gladness and happiness and joy to be alive. Think about it. Think about it. You've all got your own stories. You've all had your own glimpse of the glory of God in your lives. And those glimpses, whether you've been conscious of them or not, have been enough to sustain you through all the tough times. And that's what the second Sunday of Lent is saying to us. Embrace those moments. Think about them when you go home today. You won't be able to count the glimpses of glory that you've had in your lives if you're really honest about how close God has been to you. You won't be able to name them all. There's so many. But think about them. Thank God over and over and over again for them. Realize already how your glimpse of God's glory has already gotten you through what you've gotten through to be here today. Realize that God is so present to you, and God has shown himself to you in countless, countless ways. Lent is a season of joy. It's a season of joy because you and I are invited to embrace what Pope Benedict called the absolute certainty of God's love. No matter what. Our pain is not a measure of God's presence. Our suffering is not a measure of God's presence or absence. It's life. It's reality. And we have to come down the mountaintop sometime and simply deal with what's before us. But at those times, what we should most do is remember our own glimpses of glory. That's what today is called. A glimpse of the glory of God. Remember yours. Think about them all day today and thank God for them because they make you the people who you are, people who stand firm in the Lord, people who remain faithful no matter what. That's who you are, the people who remain faithful no matter what.